And I think most people in recovery, for sure, who are successful, are regularly having hard conversations with others, probably from recovery, who are open to listening to those conversations and respond. But they're vulnerable. It's on a much more vulnerable level than your typical conversations.
Sure.
As a culture and as a way of life.
And welcome to Miracles from the Hill podcast, where we share raw stories that display the anatomy of God's grace here at Miracle Hill Ministries. If this is your first time joining us, please subscribe. And of course, you can like, comment, and leave a review. To connect with us, visit our website linked in the description box. And now, here's our host, Ryan Dirk.
Greetings, listeners. Welcome back to Season 4 of the Miracles from the Hill podcast. This season, we're diving into the reality of addiction and its solutions. If you want to hear more about the podcast, please pause the episode, leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to. You can also follow the show to make sure that you are the very first one to get new content. And maybe most importantly, podcast at miraclehill.org. Hit us up. Let us know what you think. Ask us questions. And man, suggest content. Like at some point, we're going to be done with season 4. And when we're recording this right now, we're trying to figure out what season 5 is going to be. We'd love to have you give us an answer for season 6 or 7 or wherever we are down the road. So we are excited this morning to have my buddy Dave Crooks joining us. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning.
So Dave is the... are you the CEO or the executive director? What's your title?
Executive director.
Executive director of Evans Training Center, which is a men's addiction recovery program. They may not call it that. I'm calling it that now until we get into him telling us what it is exactly. So as we've been framing out all these episodes, Dave, we have been walking through the steps, which makes me excited about this episode because I know you guys don't use the steps, right? You use kind of a slightly different philosophy. So we're on step 10, which is about continuing to take personal inventory, but we're going to get into that in a minute. But we start, my favorite place to start on these things, with the question, how did you meet Jesus?
Pure desperation. So my story of meeting Jesus, I was in my early 20s. I was 20. And
that's really early 20s.
It's as early 20s as you can get. And I had been battling my own addiction to drugs and alcohol for at least 5 years by the time I was 20, and tried to stop through different ways, but never really seriously tried to stop. But then at 19 and 20, I really, really was trying to stop. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, like I'm an addict. I didn't think I was. I never considered myself that way until I really, truly stopped. You know, I was definitely one of those guys who thought and said, I could stop anytime I want to. You know, many people say to me today, I just don't want to yet, you know. But when I tried, I couldn't. And I realized I was trapped. And somehow over the course of a couple years, well, a year, God started to intersect my life with some serious Christian people. It started with a business partner of my father who just took note of me. And one day I was in my dad's office, and I was alone with this guy. His name is Jeff. And he just started asking me piercing questions about myself. And my first thought was, that's none of your business, you know. Who are you to ask me this stuff? But my next thought was, this guy's interesting, you know. And then he started to invite me to church and wanted me to meet his friends, and he just took interest in my life. And he saw what was going on with me, and he wanted to help. And so over the course of the next year or so, I was around Christian people, and I was hearing the gospel again and again, although I wasn't ready to embrace it. But there was something genuine about these people. And it was really interesting, too, because it was like a cowboy church, and I was certainly not a cowboy. I was this stranger in this weird culture, but they all seemed to have this genuine faith.
What's a cowboy church?
It's a church where everybody there's a cowboy. They would go to rodeos, and one of them was like a professional bronc rider, and it was Triple Cross Ranch Church in Davie, Florida, and it was just a random bunch of people for me to be around, but that's where I saw God's love, and these people treated me with love. They didn't know me for anything, but they were showing God's love to me. And now they couldn't help me get sober, but they introduced me to what God's love really was. So eventually, I found myself, relapsing again, and I was back living in my dad's house, and it was about 3 a.m, and I had been using cocaine most of the day, and then I was drinking alcohol all night to try to force myself to fall asleep because I knew I had to get up at 6:30 a.m. to drive to go to work. And it just hit me in that moment what I had become. And for the first time in my life ever, I had heard that whoever calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. I heard it again and again and again. And I knew his name was Jesus based on what I heard. And I got down on my knees in that bedroom. At this time, I'm 21.
Yeah.
And I called out to the Lord. And it felt silly and crazy. I felt like I was doing something foolish. It felt foolish for me to force the words Jesus out of my mouth. Like, what am I doing? I'm calling into the air. And I said, Jesus, if you're real, either help me or let me die. And then I said everything I thought I was supposed to say. I'm a sinner. Forgive me. I'm caught in sin. I need to be rescued. Please save me. I'll do anything. Negotiating. But that was, I honestly, from my heart, called out to Jesus, and I asked him to forgive me and save me. And within a couple weeks of that moment, I found myself in a long-term Christian recovery program down in South Florida called Dunklin. And that's where it all began for me.
Okay. So, side note, I bet there was a lot of sermons about how Jesus was a cowboy, right? It's a good way of thinking about Jesus as kind of a cowboy out there doing his thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So walk through your recovery journey. So you wind up at Dunklin. So talk about that and kind of bring us up to where you are today.
Sure. So Dunklin, and ironically, this gentleman, Jeff, who I mentioned earlier, I said he wanted to introduce me to his friends. So one time he said, let's go to church together. And so he took me out to this camp in the middle of Okeechobee, Florida, called Dunklin, to meet some of his friends. And I went to a Sunday school class there, and then it happened to be a program graduation day. So I went to church. In that church service, it was a bunch of young men sharing their stories about how they were addicts, and then Jesus saved them and transformed them, and how this program, God used this program to transform their lives. And so I sat through that whole thing and listened to all those testimonies at Dunklin. And the crazy thing is, it never occurred to me why he brought me there. I just thought I was there to meet his friends. And I literally said when we left that place, Dunklin, to drive home, I said to him, wow, it's really neat that there's a place like that out there for guys like that who need that kind of help.
Yeah.
And it was a year later that I actually went there. So he had planted a seed. But when push came to shove, when I knew it was time, I knew exactly where I was supposed to go. So I guess let that be an encouraging thought to somebody who maybe is trying to plant seeds in somebody and not seeing fruit. It's worth planting those seeds. Dunklin it still exists, it's still running today, 250 acre-ish ranch, farm, whatever you want to call it. It was founded by a guy named Mickey Evans, and Mickey was a Baptist pastor whose father happened to pass away in alcoholism in South Florida. And so Mickey had a soft heart for guys in addiction, and he just wanted to do something to help those alcoholics like his dad. So he started a little camp in the woods. And, it's a long story how that all developed, but he just set his sights on helping addicts, and it grew and grew and grew over the years. And now Dunklin operates, it's a 70-bed facility, and it's isolated out in the middle of Okeechobee, Florida. and it's got about 30 staff members, and the staff lives there on site. It's organized as a church, so it's Dunklin Memorial Church. They have services out there on Sunday, and it's kind of a self-contained, Mickey would call it. Now, Mickey has passed away now. He calls it a city of refuge. And so he's thinking about the passage about the manslayer.
Sure.
He's got a city of refuge for guys struggling with addiction and their families. And so when I got there, it was fully functioning, up and running. It had already been decades old. And I just fell into the grind. We would get up in the morning, and they would teach us how to journal and pray and have a quiet time with the Lord. Then we would go to different recovery classes in the morning times. And in the afternoons, we would all walk to a central location in the center of camp that was a big wooden pallet manufacturing facility and sawmill. And we would build pallets or cut logs or cut lumber, do that until the end of the day, have dinner, do homework, have activities scheduled through the evenings, and start over in the morning. And we did that for 10 months long. And that's where I learned how to have a relationship with the Lord, how to have a relationship with others, how to have a work ethic that was worth something. Because we didn't pay anything to be there. We just had to give some sweat equity in the afternoons in that sawmill. And it was a lot of sweat in 100-degree Okeechobee swamp weather, cutting logs or building pallets. But, man, I needed that. I needed just to learn how to be a responsible adult as much as I needed to learn who Jesus was and how to pray and how to think of my addiction. I needed all that man stuff that I was lacking as I was just being immature and numbing myself to reality for years and years before.
So you stay there for the 10 months, and you graduate the program.
Yep.
And then what happens?
Fall right on my face.
So you left.
Yes. So I don't want to share this part of my story because it's embarrassing, but it's so common. It's worth sharing. So I guess looking back now, I would think about that first 10-month stint, if you want to say it that way, in a program as an investigative sort of faith. Yeah, I called on the Lord. I ended up in this weird place in the middle of nowhere. I learned all this new stuff. I thought it was all very interesting. There were bits and pieces of it that I found valuable and other bits and pieces that I wasn't quite ready to embrace. And I thought to myself, I'm going to take all the really good stuff that I've learned here, and then I'm going to go home and I'm going to do what I want, but I'm not going to do drugs and alcohol. I'm not going to do that, But I'm basically, it's my life, and so I'm going to do what I want with my life, and I'll add these pieces to it. And that was my mentality on the way out. So I hadn't come to a place in my heart where my heart's cry was, Jesus, my life is yours. I surrender. What do you want me to do next? That wasn't my heart's cry. My heart's cry was, I'm sober. God's given me a new life. I'm going to go live it. And I'm going to go to church on Sunday too.
Yeah.
So I fell on my face. It didn't take long. Within a few months of being out of that program, I was making compromises. In my relationship with women, was making compromises, and then picking up dip. I didn't even really dip. There was just something in me that wanted to do something stupid, and then I picked up a beer. And then once I did that, I felt like I had really betrayed the Lord. Now it's cocaine. And in 3 months, I'm back doing exactly what brought me there in the first place. So I had seen other guys do this and disintegrate, and I knew I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to die.
Yeah.
I still had a will to live, and I had disappointed everybody, and I was ashamed. And as I thought about what should I do, all I could think in my heart was go back to Dunklin. And so I didn't even call. I just packed up my stuff, and I just went. Then I showed up, and I walked up the sidewalk in the front office, and the program director was standing there in the sidewalk. His name is Wayne Carter. And I said, I need to come back. And he said, I know. We all know. we were just waiting for you to see, what you needed to see. They all knew that I was immature and underdeveloped, and I had a lot more to learn, and I stopped being teachable, and they were sort of just waiting for me to see that myself. I couldn't see what they could see. So it was no surprise to any of them that I was back. And they put me through some sort of fast track version of the program, and with a few other guys who had done something similar to what I had done. They had a special class for us called the retread class. So we were the tires, needed some extra tread. And there's 4 of us in there, and we had a teacher who was passionate about making sure that we didn't make those same mistakes. And it was really, really a good thing to go back through. It was a humbling thing.
Sure. And
going back through it the second time, I definitely had a more open mind. I was much less selective about what I was going to embrace and what I was going to just leave on the shelf. I was just more open. I realized it wasn't up to me what I was going to accept and what I wasn't going to accept. I was just going to do my best to buy into everything they were saying and be humble and teachable and try to embrace it as much as I could. So I did that, and then I entered into what they call SLT, Servant Leadership Training, which is a year-long program, ministry training program, something similar to what the MT program might be at Miracle Hill Overcomers. And essentially went through the whole program again, except now we learned to teach the lessons in the classroom under mentorship. We had a special leadership class for ourselves all week long. We learned to lead on the job sites. So we just had extra responsibility, and we started to learn how to be kind of peer navigators for all the other guys in the program. It was something that we didn't get paid to do that. It was a voluntary thing that you could sign up for. And I signed up for that, and I did that year. And looking back, I got to say that was one of the best years of my life. So I got this one moment in SLT in the middle of it that I remember. It sticks out. And I had a roommate who was also in SLT. His name was Mark Johnson. And I was probably about halfway through SLT, 6 months in. And we were in the bedroom, and I was just sitting on my bunk, and Mark was sitting across from me, and I just started crying. I just started weeping in that moment. I'm getting teary-eyed now. And he's like, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I was like, "That's the thing. Nothing. Yeah, nothing's wrong. Like, I got peace. I have nothing. I'm living in this weird program in the middle of nowhere, materially speaking, I'm poor, and in this ministry training program at this rehab, I am happy. I've got joy. I've got peace. I remember when I went into that program, the cry of my heart was, I just want to be comfortable in my own skin, and not have to have a chemical to be comfortable. And in the middle of this thing, which was crazy, and the responsibilities of SLT were crazy, the hours, and servant leadership training, that servant part was not just words, that was real. We were carrying a burden there in that place. But man, I had peace and joy and fulfillment, and I didn't have anything, but I didn't need anything. I had a relationship with God that was real, and relationships with others that were healthy. I had no hidden sin, nothing to hide from anybody, and I was just in a good place.
And so from there, you go on staff with Evans.
Yeah.
And you eventually make your way up here. So talk through that. How do you wind up at? All right, you were going staff at Dunklin,
right?
And then you make your way up here to Evans.
Yeah, so I ended up going on to staff. At the same time, I had met my wife. So my wife Dunklin is a church, and so the general public can go to church out there on Sundays. And at a vacation Bible school, she was one of the youth leaders for the girls, and I was running the soundboard, and we met. And so I started pursuing my relationship with her, which I was allowed to do as a young staff member. I wasn't allowed to date in SLT. There was no time for that. So we ended up getting married. And at this now,
and you had nothing.
No. So I was just I was just talking to my sons about this in the car on Sunday. Well, I had my boys and I took them to the gun and knife show to get a present for their grandfather. And I decided, okay, I got their undivided attention. We're going to talk about how to choose a wife. So they're 14 and 11, but it's worth talking about. And I was saying to them, now, many people feel like they've got to get everything perfectly prepared before marriage. I need to have this much money, I need to have this job and this house, and I need to get all these things tidied up. And I said, but that's not how it was for your mother and I. Like, I had less than $1,000 in cash, and I lived in a single wide trailer, ministry owned at Dunklin, and Lacey was still in college. And looking back, I mean, I felt like I was pretty mature at the time, but looking back almost 20 years later, I was a child. It's absolutely full of immaturity, and so was she.
Her parents must have been godly people to see through that.
Oh my gosh. Her dad had actually been through Dunklin a few years prior to me, which is why they were out there in the first place. But definitely his dream for his daughter wasn't to marry a Dunklin guy. Yeah. So that was scary stuff for them. Her mom was super excited. Her dad was scared to death. But eventually we got through all of that. But anyways, we got married. I had nothing. She had nothing. It worked out. Obviously, we just celebrated our 17-year anniversary this past weekend and have 4 kids. At this point, I'm 3 years headed in the right direction. And there's a prayer meeting at Dunklin. And the tone of the meeting is, all the staff's there. The tone of the meeting is, we're overstaffed. And not kicking anybody out or anything, but if you feel like the Lord might be calling you to a next step, might be good to think about that right now. Now, I can't say that the Lord was calling me out of there, but I felt like this is a good opportunity to go kind of take my wings, get out of this weird camp place in the middle of nowhere, see, is my faith real, or is it the result of this environment I'm in all the time? Is God real outside of this bubble? I'm in a different mindset now than I was 3 years ago. And Lacey and I had just gotten married. We had some money in the bank from the wedding and no real responsibilities or anything. And so we had friends who lived in Greenville. And we thought, let's just move to Greenville and just start life, just go on an adventure as a married couple. And it was not any more deep thought than that. And so I told them I was going to move on, and they accepted that. We rented a moving truck, and we just moved up to Greenville. We picked out an apartment, and I literally went to the shopping plaza closest to the apartment, and I walked into every place in the plaza asking for a job. And I got a job at Tony's New York Style Pizza on Haywood Road. It's now closed down. And he said, well, what have you been doing? I said, well, I've been in rehab for 3 years. He said, all right, appreciate your honesty. Do you know how to make pizza? Nope, but I'm a fast learner. I said, okay, you start Monday. And that was it.
Tony sounds like a good guy.
Yeah. So I made pizza. Well, I was a salad guy first. To be the pizza guy at a New York style pizza restaurant.
You got to earn that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But I had Tony from New York on my right and Paulie from New Jersey on my left. And Paulie was a recovering addict, heavy into AA. And we talked about recovery stuff a lot. And I enjoyed it. I made pizzas and I learned that God was real outside of that weird place. I learned that I could stay sober. And it wasn't dependent on that environment. And Lacey and I were able to enjoy our marriage. She started leasing apartments where we were living. And we just kind of lived that way for a few years. Finally, we church hopped all over the place and landed in a good spot in Greenville. And then for 3 years we were that way. And I kind of got all my questions answered. Is God real? Can I stay sober? All that stuff was answered. The answer was yes. God is real. I'm free. Praise the Lord. Our life was good. I didn't relapse or anything. Everything was on track. But I really, despite all of that, I had this thing inside of me saying, okay, now what? So are you just going to enjoy this life now? And I had this conviction that I needed to share that with all these other young guys.
Sure.
Because guys in the program, they'll say that and they think that, well, the only reason you're sober is because you're in this program, but you can't live sober outside of a program. So it's not real or something. Like what's going on in the program isn't you can apply that to life outside. It doesn't work. But that's not true. But I couldn't say that wasn't true from conviction because I hadn't done it.
Yeah.
So it was nice to have lived that and then be able to go back to the program and say, no, that's not true. You absolutely can apply the things you learn here outside. I just did it for a few years. Mm-hmm. It totally does transfer over. So I really missed helping
ministry.
guys. Yeah. And it was a yearning. And I actually met with Ben Dismukes, who's the founder of Evans Training Center, because he had that vision for Evans Training Center on his heart already, him and his father. But he wasn't ready yet at that time to get it started. He just didn't feel like God had told him it was time for him to start things. So he was building his family and his personal business, and it just wasn't the right time. So I ended up going back to Dunklin, and I got my job back at Dunklin. And then I worked in full-time ministry for the next 6 years at Dunklin.
And Ben starts Evans.
At that time, yeah. So I'm at Dunklin working, and then sometime in that time frame, Ben feels like it's clear to him that it's time to go ahead and launch Evans Training Center. And the last piece of the puzzle for him that they needed was a place to do it at. And his wife, Jessica, school teacher at District 5 in Lyman, she was talking to people at work about the vision. And someone said, well, what do you need? And she said, well, I need a house. And the lady said, well, I've got a house, and it's vacant, and you guys can use it for free. And boom, that was it. So they had a house, and Dunklin actually sent somebody up here to be like a house man to help Ben out, an SLT guy. And Ben took in his first guy, and he would teach the classes that we went through down there at Dunklin. And then the guy would get in his truck, and they would go cut lawns in the afternoon. So we didn't have a pallet shop. He had a little lawn business. But essentially, he just replicated everything that we had learned down there in Florida. Sure. And just did it on a smaller scale up here. So he was doing that here, and then I was doing my thing down there at Dunklin.
And then the Lord calls you up.
Yes-ish.
What does yes-ish mean?
I prayed this morning that I would just be totally honest.
Yeah.
And that something I say would be helpful to somebody. But
sure.
here, this is a part of my story that is so embarrassing and shameful, and I don't want to talk about it, so it's probably good to talk about it because I'm probably not super alone in having embarrassing, shameful moments of my journey with the Lord. I'm thinking to what I said earlier. I'm sitting in SLT with nothing, crying because I'm so grateful and content. Yeah. And then years later, I'm at Dunklin, and I've sort of worked my way up through the ranks, in a sense, and I'm all semi part of the inner circle of leadership, and not much more else to do or go there. And I'm finding myself ungrateful, discontent, scared of the future. Now I have 4 kids, and I'm thinking things like I'll never be able to help them go through college, working in this ministry setting. I'm never going to be able to own my own home and provide for my family long. I started to get a bad attitude. So somehow I had gotten spoiled and prideful, and I forgot how content I was with nothing. And then I had a lot more than nothing, and I was discontent and frustrated and arrogant.
All right, so don't go any further.
Okay.
So let's pause on that.
Okay.
And let's insert the principles of the step into it and develop some questions off of it. Okay.
So we're going to talk about how I failed at this step at this point.
Yeah, well, it's a really valuable point, right?
Yeah.
So the 10th step, of which is not part of Dunklin or Evans, but the principles are. 10th step says we continue to take personal inventory, and when we're wrong, promptly admitted it. So you talked earlier in your story about them teaching you to journal, right? Which is a form of inventorying, right? It's keeping track of where you've been and what you're doing. And step 10 is like this natural progression of the steps. So steps 1, 2, and 3 are about your relationship with God. Steps 4 through 9 are about your relationship with yourself and your relationship with others. And step 10's purpose is just to keep you going through steps 4 through 9 over and over and over and over and over again. Yeah. Step 11's purpose is to put you back through steps 1 through and 3 over and over and over again. So back in SLT, you had enough awareness to see joy and contentment in your life and peace. And now we fast forward in the story, and you've got so much more, right? You got a wife, you got kids at this point, and you are discontent. How did inventorying or the lack thereof contribute to that?
I want to give you the most clear and honest answer I can to that question because it's important. I don't know if everything I'm going to say is going to be accurate, so you have to challenge me if I say something that sounds ridiculous.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with I think.
Okay.
I think I can track back the lack of inventory to something having to do with immaturity in handling heavier responsibilities.
Okay.
In SLT, at the time, it felt like I was responsible for so much. But looking back, I was basically responsible for nothing. My responsibilities were super low. And as I gained more and more responsibilities in real life with kids and wife, and then at Dunklin, I had mentioned I had kind of, I'm an overachiever by nature. And so I was pushing and trying to excel in everything. So I was busy building the business side of things. I was preaching in church. I was teaching in the classroom. I was part of the eldership. And my level of responsibility and my stature in my mind got pretty high up there. I'm pretty important, in my little bubble world. And I started to feel like a lot of guys feel like I can't share this, or I'm going to be either in trouble or people will think less of me.
Like this weakness that so you have discerned that
I'm
you're
not
leading
in a
double
good
life.
spot. I'm not in a good spot.
Yeah.
If you ask my wife, how's Dave? She might give a disgusted, a face of something. I'm in a place where it's important to me to be in control and in charge and climbing some kind of internal ladder of sorts at this place. And I'm in charge of the pallet shop. Whoop-de-doo. But to me, in that world, that was pretty important stuff,
Well, it was important.
Yeah.
So I think I would just change it a little bit and say, I think, which is the point of a podcast, right? We're both talking about what we think, is that life has a lot to do with how we prioritize things, right? And where we put our effort and our energy. So pause on that. I read an article many, many years ago. More years than I can recall. And I think it was a Time magazine article. I don't remember. And it said that successful people have two things in common. Success defined by the world, right? Not defined the way that we would define it biblically. But the two things that they have in common is they journal and they set goals. Okay. So I think that's fascinating. And it sounds weird, but if you go to your library and you go to the autobiography section of all these famous people, right? Like you're reading their memoirs, right? Like they journaled and they set goals.
Yeah.
And so they prioritized the achievement of those goals, and then they journal. They may not realize this, but they journal to keep track of it. right? Like that's a way of inventorying. So back to the priorities thing.
Yeah.
So I tell guys in early recovery that their priorities, and gals, that their priority needs to be Jesus, recovery, everything else. Okay. The reason I put recovery up there is because, number one, I don't think it violates anything biblical, right? Especially the way that you and I think about recovery. But number two, if you don't keep the house clean, you lose everything else anyways.
Yep.
And so what it sounds like from this side of the two chairs here is that your priorities got way out of whack.
Yep.
You weren't keeping track of the things that were most important, which was chasing Jesus and chasing recovery, which would automatically mean chasing your wife and actually serving rather than leading, right? And so things got out of whack, and you got the results of that.
Yeah.
You think that's fair?
I do. My wife would be nodding her head yes, too. If Lacey was sitting here right now, she would say definitely she did not feel like her and our kids were my priority. I was really good. I felt like I was really good at dealing with guys in recovery and with business and with making money and with achieving things. That's where I was really good at, and I was achieving, and I felt like I was getting significance from that, like a lot of men do. And I was not a good dad of little kids.
So let's examine that a little bit. So go back to Dunklin version 1 or Dunklin version 2. Okay. So not a 12-step program.
No.
But was this principle of keeping track and inventorying a thing that you guys talked about?
Certainly, every day.
Okay, and how was it taught? Like what would you have been telling somebody that they needed to do with their life?
Well, it's taught, first of all, in the program side of things, it's taught in a very over-directed way. In other words, there's a sheet that you're filling out every single day. And down the left side, there's liabilities and attitude liabilities. Down the right side, there's positive attitude assets. And you're thinking about your last 24 hours. And as you're journaling, you're literally marking on this sheet a few things that really pop out at you about what was going on in your attitude yesterday. And you're praying about those things and asking God for wisdom on that kind of stuff. That's private. So there's pros and cons to that because our hearts are deceptive. And even though I'm doing that private exercise all the time, I may still be blind to what's really going on with me.
Sure.
So but nonetheless, there's that piece where I'm trying to take a serious look at what's not right in my soul yesterday and praying about that. And then the rest of it is utilizing the relationships around you. By being painfully honest about what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and asking for input and advice. Just basic relationships with people that you trust, but deeper than talking about the weather, on a regular basis, as a culture, as a way of life. And I think most people in recovery, for sure, who are successful, are regularly having hard conversations with others, probably from recovery, who are open to listening to those conversations and respond, but they're vulnerable. It's on a much more vulnerable level than your typical conversations.
Sure.
As a culture and as a way of life. And so I would, had I been if I could go back and counsel myself.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, the first thing I wanted to say to myself was, you need to prioritize your family. Crooks. Yeah. Everyone called me Crooks there. But as soon as I want to say that to myself, I'm immediately reminded by mentors who were in my life, and they were telling me that. I just wasn't listening. I was more, I couldn't hear them. Yeah, they were telling me, you need to prioritize your family. They weren't really, it got to a place where my achievements making more money in the past, it wasn't really impressive to anybody anymore. The guys who were spiritually sensitive, who were in my life, they were concerned about the well-being of my family. They even said so to me. But for whatever reason, I wasn't hearing them. I was closed off to listening to accountability. And I guess that's part of accountability that we got to be honest about, that regardless of who you set in your life to hold you accountable, if you won't listen.
Yeah, accountability only works if you prioritize accountability. It doesn't matter if you have 50 people, if you're not listening to them. And we, humans, we have this great tendency to counselor shop, right? Like I go to Michael
right.
and I say, Michael, what do you think I should do here? And he gives me the answer I don't want. So I go to Dave and I say, Dave, what do you think I should do here? And you give me the answer that I do want. So that's what I do.
Yeah.
So do you think your priorities got out of whack when you came to Greenville, or did they get put back in order when you got to Dunklin and pride became the issue?
I think as I built my family, and I think I never felt more inadequate as a person, as a man, than when I started having a bunch of kids. And when my marriage got hard because of the pressures of the family and the kids and marriage. When Lacey and I moved to Greenville, we had money in the bank and no real responsibilities, and life was easy.
Yeah.
And marriage wasn't hard at that time. It was all just a big fun and frolic,
Fun and frolic.
Yeah. As the pressures of being a dad came into the mix, I sort of crumbled under some of that pressure. I had godly examples around me, but I really struggled with being a good dad. Particularly when my kids were younger. I've said that before because I think I'm doing a way better job now. And if Lacey was here, she would say I'm doing a much better job now. So I'm not lying about that. But I was underdeveloped as in that area of my life. And so I felt really, really insecure as a dad, as a husband. But I felt really secure being in the dorms with the guys. They all thought I was awesome. I was full of wisdom for the guys in drug rehab, but not so full of wisdom as a father and a husband. And so I could have changed that. I could have forced myself to press pause on getting my kicks from ministry, which sounds crazy, and instead dial into my family and try to develop that more. Mm-hmm. But I chose not to do that. I chose to avoid some of that pressure. Some of that probably comes from my own baggage from childhood, but some of that was just my poor dealing with life's pressures of being a father. I just was not mature in that area because it is true. People mention it. Lacey told me she wanted they would have in part of Dunklin, a really neat part is that they have hotels out there on site, and those hotels are so that families can come on the weekends and they stay the whole weekend, and they go through marriage counseling with the husbands. Mm-hmm. So husband and wife and kids, they get to slowly reintegrate as healthy families over the course of 10 months. And that's a unique piece of the puzzle there that is beautiful.
Right.
When dad comes home, it's not a shock to the system. They've already rebuilt a new relationship there. So the family atmosphere is all over the place. But my family at home didn't reflect what was going on in those classrooms. But it could have. Lacey asked me several times, can we go through family recovery? And I'd be like, we don't need that. I think I didn't want people to see my nakedness in that area.
So the Dave that I know now, let me back up. A counselor of mine who's still a Miracle Hill counselor, Uncle Mark Alverson, he used to always say, it doesn't matter where truth comes from if you're in the truth business. His point was we should never get too big for our britches that somebody can't speak truth into our lives. The example that he would he would use. He would say, so if a guy comes in off the street today into one of our shelters,
Right.
and he's got like a crack pipe, burned onto his lip, and he says, Ryan, you struggle with X, right? If it's true, it doesn't matter that it's coming from him. And I can't excuse the fact that it's coming from him because he doesn't look like me or his life is different. So the Dave that I know today is about the truth business, right? Like, you value that. So is it this season of struggle back at Dunklin that kind of put a premium on this idea of truth, which is just a principle of inventory, right? Like, if you care, then you're going to look at it and you're going to let other people look at it. But if you don't care, you're going to hide from it. You're going to be away from truth.
It's a good way to frame that. I guess so. I think I learned from all of that situation because it unraveled from there. Like, it all just got worse and worse, and then I complicated it with extra sin on top. It started to unravel. I ended up let me go on in the story.
Okay.
Try to answer that question a little longer than you asked me to, but eventually, rather than deal with the truth or face it, and Lacey's asking me to go through marriage counseling, and I'm telling her, no, we don't need that. And people are telling me I need to prioritize my family, and I'm ignoring them. Maybe I feel like I can't or whatever. So I end up deciding I think it's time for me to leave the ministry. On top of that, and I don't want to share this either, but I'm going to. Lord, forgive me. I hadn't struggled with thinking about or looking at pornography at all in years and years and years. But in the middle of this, I decide I'm gonna dabble, in looking at porn. So now I'm the guy preaching in church with a crappy family situation at home who's also dabbling in porn. Like, I'm this really weird walking contradiction that if I was in some prominent church and society, tabloids would love to get.
Well, James would say, double-minded man, unstable in all his ways,
yeah,
right?
Now I'm like that. So in the midst of that framework of mine, I'm like, okay, I got to get out of here. I can't be in ministry. I'm not a good father. I'm doing this now.
Rather than face it,
yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than look at it and expose it, you try to run away from it.
What would have happened? And maybe some of my mentors might hear this podcast one day. They'll be like, I knew it. No, they know the truth. But what would have happened if I would have went to Hugh Murrow and Nick Reynolds and Todd Haskell and said, I'm a mess. I don't know how to be a good dad. Lacey's disappointed in our marriage right now. And I'm starting to dabble in porn. I don't know what's going on with. I'm a mess, and I need help. They would have done absolutely anything they could to help me and get me back on track. I know them. They absolutely would have done that, but I couldn't. I couldn't buy humility at that point in my life for some reason.
You were stuck in a shame cycle too.
Yeah. So rather than face it, I cooked up an elaborate plan to run from it over the course of a year. It wasn't I run out the door. It was a slow process, but I could see it more clearly now looking back. It was wrong. It would have been way better if I would have just chose to grow up there and by facing it instead of hide and run. But what's crazy is I've been teaching guys to do what I should have done for years, but couldn't do it myself.
Yeah, it's the second half of the step. And when we are wrong, promptly admit it.
Yeah, I didn't promptly admit it. It took me a while. So I did not come to South Carolina to go to work with Ben Dismukes at Evans Training Center. I came to South Carolina to go into business with my father-in-law and start making more money so that I could help my kids get into college and buy a house for my family. And I was sort of turning my back on ministry, as if God couldn't provide for my family. If I dedicate my life to God in ministry, he's definitely going to not provide for my family. It's crazy to say it that way, but somehow I convinced myself that that was true. So I moved up here to go to work with my father-in-law. And after over a decade of total sobriety from chemicals, in the midst of doing that job, that work with him, I was utterly miserable. I felt like I had made a horrible mistake. Nobody really knew the depth to which, nobody knew all the inner workings of everything I just described to you, what was going on behind the scenes of all of that. I knew. So I was a little tortured inside. And so I did the smart thing, and I overcomplicated it even more by one weekend when Lacey went home to visit her family in Florida. I went to the gas station and got a beer. Something if anybody had no excuse to ever do that, it was definitely me. But I did it. I went to 7-Eleven, got a beer, drank it, and the best beer I've ever had in my life is how it felt at the moment. It's like it was so nice to just be numb for a second, and then half hour later, go back to that 7-Eleven, get a 6-pack, drink every single one. Just like you teach somebody, you can't go back and, I was right back in it. And then now I'm in a cycle of a few months of drinking and hiding, and then it gets exposed, and it's devastating to everybody, embarrassing and devastating to my family, obviously. Lacey's parents, who I'm in business with, are devastated and disgusted. All of my friends and mentors and peer colleagues at Dunklin are just confused, frustrated, angry, all the above, betrayed. And now I'm drinking and hiding. So I'm wearing a nice suit, driving a fancy car, going to business lunches, pouring vodka in a 7-Eleven big gulp cup and drinking before I go into a business networking meeting. Oh, what's going on with me? What am I doing? How did I get here? And I'll never forget. God is so unbelievably good and merciful. I start to say something and starts with, I'll never forget. And these are these moments where God, despite my utter stupidity and foolishness, reaches down and says, I see you, son. I love you.
Yeah.
Because I certainly didn't love, at that moment, I knew I was a piece of crap, I had really violated everything I knew to be right and true. And I get a text from a guy who I trained to take my place at Dunklin in one area, in the bookkeeping area. His name was Keith Osborne. And he says, Dave, I love you. We're going into a prayer meeting today at Dunklin. I just want you to know I'm praying for you. And I love you, and God loves you, and I'm your friend. And I just broke down crying in my car. And it was God speaking to me. Hey, psst, come on. This isn't who you are, man. Stop it, And and so I called my friends at Dunklin. They said, hey, Ben Dismukes is in your backyard in Spartanburg. Just go talk to him. Just go get your head screwed on straight. So one of the questions on your sheet is, how did you get to Evans Training Center? No, God didn't call me out. I didn't get blessed out to go to Evans Training Center.
I think it's the second question.
We got really far on this sheet of questions. Yeah, so it wasn't some pretty thing. Now, they were super gracious to me in the way they communicated with the onlookers. Wow, and they had been praying that God would send somebody to help, because at this point in that ministry's development, they were overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And Ben just couldn't do everything by himself. It was just too much. And his dad was working full time and helping on the side, but they were overwhelmed, and they were praying, God, please send somebody. Now, they didn't expect me to show up the way that I showed up, but they were intrigued and kind of glad that I showed up, and kind of glad to be part of the story that God was writing of my life, and kind of glad we all intersected. And it was very interesting to everybody. Like, this is kind of weird. Dave Crooks is here. He was drinking last week, but that's not good. But this is interesting, So everyone's trying to discern what's going on here, And I agreed just to kind of hang out with Ben for a week or two and kind of clear my head out. And it was here's something that was hard, but God's grace. Every year, Ben would load up all the guys in the program and go down to Dunklin for the annual homecoming. Well, that was a week after I showed up there to meet up with him. And, I was going to stay there for a few days and I ended up just basically never leaving. And so Lacey was down in Florida visiting her parents, dealing with her feelings, with the kids. I was with Ben, and it's time to go to Florida to Dunklin. And he's like, well, your wife's down there. Just come with us. Just ride down there with us, and you'll meet up with her there, and then you guys could ride back together, whatever. I'm like, okay, fine. So I go down to Dunklin with all the Evans guys, a couple weeks after I got to Evans. And I had just left Dunklin, less than a year ago. So I show up there for homecoming. Dave, Crooks. Everyone calls me Crooks. You're working with Evans now? Not exactly. What do you mean? Yeah. Well, and now I'm having to tell people what I've done, and the looks on their face, just confusion. Like, what? You did what? And they were just, people didn't know how to take that, And it was homecoming too, so all kinds of alumni. I'm meeting people all weekend long and having to tell person after person after person after person about my failure, and that was brutal. But it was also kind of God's grace, because all in one shot, everybody knew, in one weekend, and I got to tell the truth to a ton of people all at once. I had the pleasure of resigning from the board that weekend, signing some paperwork, facing the elders and telling them what I did.
You were on the board
at
Dunklin.
Yeah, for a very short time.
Okay, so let's pause on the story. Okay, so you're exposed.
Totally exposed.
Okay, so this is the theme through this whole story, right? Like, you hide and you're exposed.
Totally.
You hide and you're exposed.
Yeah.
And so in this scenario, you're in this like mini Dunklin, aka Evans Training Center.
Yep.
How do you and Ben work through kind of inventorying where your life is and what needs to change?
Started with family. Ben, just like the other spiritually minded men who've been mentors in my life, keyed in right away on my priorities being out of whack. I'm trying to be somebody instead of being the husband and father that my family desires and deserves. And he keyed in on that quick. So from the very beginning, and he reminds me of this from time to time, because I'm still a driven person. I'm still motivated by accomplishments and projects and getting things. I'm motivated by that still.
And the important thing to note there is you have inventoried yourself and are aware of that.
Yeah.
So that's a stumbling block.
Sure.
Right? So when we inventory ongoing, it's not just the bad. You're looking at the good too, because some of the good we should be aware of. So anyways, keep going.
Yeah. So Ben has said to me from the beginning, and as recently as maybe a week or two ago, he'll probably say it to me at least once a month. He said, Crooks, I've told you from the very beginning that I'm concerned about one thing in your life, that you are being the man to your family that your family deserves. How's your marriage? How's your kids? That's all I care about. I don't really care about all the other stuff. What's going on in your house? That's all he cares about. That's all he chooses to hold me accountable for the most part. Now, I will go to him from time to time and offer up clarity and anything that he could possibly be thinking. I might go to him from time to time and say, hey, hadn't used a single chemical, not even an aspirin, not looking at porn or cheating on my wife, hadn't stole anything. I got nothing to hide from you right now. I know you didn't ask for all that, but I just needed to say it. Even if I say that, he's probably still going to say to me, yeah, oh, that's great. How's your marriage? How's Lacey? How are your kids? That's all he wants to talk to me about. Probably because he knows that's, if the priority is right, that's going to be right.
He knows your stumbling block.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I lost track of your original question.
Who knows what it was? Okay. Why do you think, I think you've kind of answered this already, why do you think we run from this idea of admitting our faults and our failures?
Fear of consequences is the first thing that comes to mind. I mean, if I answer that in context of what I was going through, I was just afraid of the consequences. And the second part of it is pride.
Yeah.
How I desire for other people to see me becomes more important than just me being honest, me being true, as ugly as it, with all my warts, trying to present something different than the true reality to outsiders.
So I want to go back to the very beginning of the story, and then we'll bring it all the way through. So when you came out of Dunklin the first time, you had a very common experience, certainly true for my own story, true for a bunch of stories, that you come out and you want to kind of pick and choose what you're going to do, right? Because you have this idea in your head built up of what your life's going to be.
Yeah.
And I find that people often want to kind of forget that they had a problem with addiction, right? Like they want to move past it. Part of inventorying is knowing who you are, right? Knowing your faults, your failures, you just called them your warts, and then all these positive things too. So arguably, had Ryan kept a solid inventory on his life, that's great, but it's only as good as you want to apply what you find, right? Or you want to address what you find.
Yeah.
So there'll be people that'll listen to this that'll be in early recovery.
Yes.
And they'll be on the struggle bus with this, right? They'll want to be re-identifying themselves or not adjusting things that they're clearly identifying in their life. What's your encouragement to them?
Everybody's definition of normal is not necessarily reality. I say that purposely because guys in early recovery, this is from my own experience of my own life, and I've seen it over and over and over and over and over. Guys do not want to identify as that guy who struggled with addiction or addict. They don't want that label. I had people as soon as I came out of the program, even the first time, there were people in my own family who never really talked to me about addiction before, but after this is kind of exposed, I think of this one uncle, and he's like, hey, I know you're out now, so there's this recovery group meeting at this time at this place. I think you should go to it. And my instinct was, I don't need that. Like, no thanks. And I didn't want to be identified as one of those guys, one of those addict guys. And a lot of young guys don't want to be identified with this group of people in recovery. My encouragement would be, and what I hear people say a lot of times, the cry of their heart is, I just want to be normal. I just want to be like a normal person. So I want to have I'll take advice from and I'll hang out with the normal people. And what they mean is those people who can have a drink and carry on with their life. It doesn't destroy them. They don't, stay up late at night getting drugs after they have a few drinks. This would be like those people. So they want to identify with those people, hang out with those people, instead of you never catch them at an AA group or a Celebrate Recovery or any of these sort of recovery things. They don't want to identify that way. I guess my encouragement would be there's nothing wrong with those people. I am one of those people. It's good to be surrounded by like-minded people who have shared similar struggles as you have. And normal to who? Like, who in this world does not struggle with something? I happen to struggle with chemical addiction. So everybody struggles with something. Don't worry about what other people might think of you or being identified with a certain group. Who cares? Go where it's safe for you, where there's people who understand how you think, who think like you think. I just wouldn't get hung up on worrying about being identified with a certain group. Everybody's identifying with a certain group in some way or another.
Okay. Give a 60-second infomercial. What is Evans Training Center? How can somebody get involved in it? What if they want to volunteer? What if somebody wants to check in? Tell them what you do.
Okay. Evans Training Center is a 10-month long minimal commitment, first of all. A residential program. It is Christian discipleship for guys who are struggling with addiction. It's modeled after Dunklin, which I described earlier, which is class time in the morning and work time in the afternoons. You don't pay anything to go to Evans Training Center. The way that you pay for your program is through your sweat equity in the afternoons on the job sites. You learn how to be a professional painter and landscaper by the time you're done there. So when you leave Evans, you have a marketable skill. You also learn how to have a vibrant relationship with the Lord and others, how to implement these tools that we've been talking about today that I admittedly failed at. Nonetheless, you'll learn how to do that well.
Yeah, but you ultimately have applied them.
Yes,
right?
yes, yeah. The journey of recovery is not linear for most people. There's pits and valleys, and
Lacey likes you now.
yeah, totally. We're on track. If you wanted help, you would call our main line, 864-844-8454.
We'll put that in the show notes.
Choose the option to speak to an intake counselor. Ben, who I mentioned earlier, his personal cell phone is going to ring in his pocket, and he likes to personally talk to every single guy coming into the program. We're still small enough right now that we can do that. We can have that personal touch, and that's one of our distinctives. We're a smaller program. Probably will never, I shouldn't say never, for the next 10 years, I would be surprised if we worked with more than 20 men at a time. We're a small, close-knit ministry where you're going to get all the one-on-one attention your heart ever desired, more than you want, for sure.
So what if somebody wants to volunteer or contribute?
Yeah, you can, on our website, you can give money online for sure, or you can send a check to contribute. If you want to volunteer, you call that same number, choose the option to speak to the volunteer coordinator. And we have options for volunteerism, especially coming up in 2024. We just built a brand new building, so we have more ways that the community can get involved. Just give us a call, and there's various ways that you could help.
Okay, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
Would you honor us and close us praying for people who are somewhere on this journey?
Yeah. Lord, I thank you for the listeners today. Some people have chosen to press pause and listen to this whole thing. And there's somebody probably listening that is thinking, I get that. I feel what you were just saying. And I pray for those who are out there in bondage to addiction, who are right on the edge of making the right kind of decisions, that you would give them the gentle nudge that it takes to make the hard choice, to call on you and to do whatever it takes to get right and stay right. Pray for humility for those who need help, and they would call out for help, and that they would find help in you. And this issue of addiction, I don't think it's going away anytime soon. But your love and your grace and your mercy, your salvation, you save people from crazy situations, all kinds of crazy situations, and you redeem them. And I pray that you would continue to do that, Lord. Help those who are caught in addiction, set them free and keep them free. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you again for coming on. Goodbye, everybody.